So today we're going to be discussing chapter 10, which deals with gender inequality. Um, uh, this is week 11 lesson. So let's get started. So here's a quote from Barack Obama. There's no excuse for sexual assault or domestic violence. There's no reason that young girls should suffer genital mutilation. There's no place in a civilized society for the early or forced marriage of children. These traditions may go back centuries. They have no place in the 21st century. So this is Barack Obama speaking in Nairobi, Kenya, because many countries believe in genital mutilation for young girls. So that's what he was addressing here. So the learning objectives for this week are to describe some of the ways gender inequality exists around the world, to identify what leads to gender inequality according to each of the three sociological and feminist theories, to analyze how the structure of society contributes to gender inequality, to analyze how the culture of society contributes to gender inequality, to describe how traditional gender roles lead to each of the social problems discussed in this chapter, to evaluate the effectiveness of U.S. laws and policies directed toward reducing gender inequality. And the chapter outline is as follows. First, we're going to discuss the global context. Then we'll discuss the sociological theories of gender inequality. Then we'll move on to gender stratification. Then the social construction of gender roles, cultural sexism. Then we'll move on to social problems and traditional gender roles and socialization. Then we'll go on to strategies for action, and finally move on to understanding gender inequality. So the introduction. So sex refers to one's biological classification, whereas gender refers to the social definitions and expectations associated with being male and female. So what this sentence is basically explaining that there is a difference between sex and gender. When we talk about sex and someone's sex, it's a biological classification. But when we speak about gender, gender is a social construct, meaning that society created this definition of what gender means, and what it means to be a male and what it means to be a female. So, for example, we have social definitions of gender that men are the more have more dominant traits, or women are more docile, or we can look at it in the perspective of jobs, of how there's quote unquote male jobs and quote unquote female jobs. We can look at it as something as simple as colors. We define pink as a female color. We define blue as a male color. Um, so these are all social definitions that have been socially constructed. They change within time. I mean, back in the day, it was normal for men to wear skirts and heels. In fact, heels were made for men before even women wore them. Now, of course, it is not quote unquote normal to see a male in heels, but now we see females in heels. But we see there how the definition of what it means to be a man and female, and all these different aspects, whether it's clothing, colors, job titles, or personal traits, they change within time. I mean, we see now that there's a lot of females who are in male dominated occupations, and we see males that are in female dominated occupations. So we see that these definitions are changing. Um, but yeah, it's important to know the difference between sex and gender. So, a transgender individual, sometimes called trans or transgender, is a person whose sense of gender identity, masculine or feminine, is inconsistent with their birth, sometimes called chromosomal, which is their sex. So, I'm sure most of you have heard about the topic of transgenders. It's something that's all over social media, it's all over um, mass media, it's a conversation that society is having right now. Um, but yeah, that's what transgender individuals mean. So sexism is the belief that there are innate psychological, behavioral, and or intellectual differences between men and women, and that these differences connote the superiority of one group and the inferiority of the other. So, the global context, the status of women and men. There's no country in the world in which women and men have equal status. Although much progress has been made in closing the gender gap in areas such as education, healthcare, employment, and government, gender inequality is still prevalent throughout the world. The World Economic Forum assessed that the gender gap in 144 countries by measuring the extent to which women have achieved equality with men in four areas: economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. Gender inequality varies across cultures, is its extent or de- not only in its extent or degree, but also in its forms. So, for example, in the United States, gender inequality in family roles commonly takes the form of an unequal division of household labor and child care. A global perspective on gender inequality must also take into account the different ways in which such inequality is viewed. So, for example, many non Muslims view the practice of Muslim women wearing a headscarf in public as a symbol of female subordination and oppression. So in 2011 in Manila, 1,500 boys were forced to take place in a mass circumcision as the organizers of the event tried to get into the Guinness World Records for the most circumcisions performed on boys 9 and older. Of late, the medical procedure has come under fire as questions arise about its safety, necessity, and similar to female genital mutilation, abuse as a child's anatomy integrity. So this is something that's new, and we're talking about this also in the United States. A lot of people are now moving away from circumcision. They see it as a form of genital mutilation. So sociological theories of gender inequality. So first we're going to discuss the structural functionalist perspective. So pre-industrial society required a division of labor based on gender. Women nursed and cared for children, men were responsible for material needs. Industrialization made traditional division of labor less functional, and a belief system remains. So we see here how in the pre-industrial society, women were did not work. They nursed and cared for kids. Men were responsible for all material needs, whether it was hunting, whether it was farming, um, and then these ideals now, even though they have changed, the belief system still remains in our society that there is occupations that are men, that women have these duties, men have these duties, and I'm sure most of you have been exposed to these definitions. So that's what this structural functionalist perspective is stating. So the conflict perspective, it states that continued domination by males requires a belief system that supports gender inequality. Two beliefs: women are inferior outside the home, women are more valuable in the home. So the conflict perspective, like always, is going to look at when we marginalize one portion the of society and how a power structure is developed, and basically saying that here we see how the conflict perspective investigate and looks at these belief systems that continue to dominate society. So in 2015, a clothing company in Indonesia manufactured a T-shirt with the words "Give this jersey to your woman, it's her job" under the words washing instructions. The company, which came under heavy criticism for their remarks, tweeted a series of apologies stating that the message is simple. Instead of doing it the wrong way, you might as well give it to a lady because they are more capable. So again, here we see a belief system that it should be women to wash clothes and handle laundry, and even in their apology, they're saying that you might as well give it to a lady because she's more capable, as if a man can't wash clothes or doesn't know how to wash clothes. So the symbolic interactionist perspective, it argues that gender and gender roles are learned through the socialization process. Women are socialized into expressive roles into which women are traditionally socialized, like nurturing and emotionally supportive roles, and men are socialized into instrumental roles, which are task-oriented roles. So, what the symbolic interactionist perspective state is that we are socialized to believe these definitions. That's why many of us still believe these definitions. You may catch yourself thinking, that's a girl thing or that's a guy thing, or men don't cry, or, all these different types of, um, roles and behavior that we're socialized to believe. And that's what the symbolic interaction perspective argues. So, gender stratification, structural sexism. So, gender stratification is basically saying, like, the marginalization of gender. So, one aspect is structural sexism, and the definition is the ways in which the organization of society, and specifically its institutions, subordinate individuals and groups based on their sex classification. So, the key word here is structural sexism. So, structural is the key word, and that's why it's talking about institutions, the structures of institutions. So, education dividend. The additional benefit of universal education for women is that it reduces the death rate of children under 5 years of age. Literacy rates worldwide indicate that women are less likely than men to be able to read and write, with millions of women being denied access to even the most basic education. So we see here, this is basically talking about how, some countries, and, even here in the United States, there's issues with education, but how some countries, you know, have women where they're can't read or write, and it's because they're denying them access to education. And there is this belief that if we do educate women, the same way we educate men around the world, the death rate of children under 5 years of age would reduce. And the key component here is that when we educate people, um, they learn how to, whether it's take care of children the right way, or look for medical issues, or learn how to read, to investigate and research. And so yeah, there's that link that when we educate women, the death rate of children under 5 years of age reduces. Another thing that we're going to be talking about in the next couple of weeks is overpopulation. And it also states that when we educate people, families, and especially women, they have less children, and helps with the overpopulation of the world. So, like I said, we're going to be discussing that in the next few weeks. But I guess the reason why I'm pointing it out is that education is key here for a lot of different issues that are going on around the world. So in 2015, few differences existed between men and women and their completion rates of high school and college degrees. In fact, in recent years, most U.S. colleges and universities have had a higher percentage of women than men enrolling directly from high school. Further, women earn fewer advanced degrees than men because they are socialized to choose marriage and motherhood over long-time career preparation. From an early age, women are exposed to images and models of femininity that stress the importance of domestic family life. So that's kind of self-explanatory, so I'll move on. So work and structural sexism. According to the International Labor Organization in 2015, about half of women are in the labor force compared to nearly 80% of men. Worldwide, women tend to work in jobs that have little prestige and low or no pay, where no product is produced, and where they are the facilitators for others. Women are more likely to hold positions of little or no authority and have more frequent and longer periods of unemployment. So the concentration of women in certain occupations and men in other occupations is referred to the occupational sex segregation. So for example, between 1983 and 2016, the percentage of female physicians more than doubled from 16% to 38%. Female dentists increased from 7% to 34%, and female clergy increased from 6% to 18%. So here what we're seeing is how, as time has passed, women have entered male-dominated occupations. Those definitions have changed. Like I said earlier, so we see it okay for these women to enter these male-dominated occupation. We kind of don't question it as much anymore, but there's still an issue. There's still pushback. There's still a belief system that, some people actually believe that women shouldn't be joining the military, for example, and women should have the right to join the military if they want to. So the glass elevator effect is the tendency for men seeking or working in traditionally female occupations to benefit from their minority status. So, for example, let's say a man decides to become a nurse. This term glass elevator effect states that, when a man seeks a traditionally female occupation, is to benefit from their minority status. There are also called pink collar jobs. These are jobs that offer few benefits, often have low prestige, and are disproportionately held by women. Thus, the color pink, like I stated before, is attached to women, females. So there you have how even this name, pink collar jobs, is using a color to link to female status. And then finally, the last term here is glass ceiling, which is an uninvisible barrier that prevents women and other minorities from moving into top corporate positions. So there is evidence that working mothers pay a price for motherhood. Research indicates that when qualifications, background, and work experience were held constant, evaluators rated mothers as less competent and committed to paid work than non-mothers. Other examples of the motherhood penalty include women who feel pressured to choose professions that permit flexibility hours and career paths, sometimes known as the mommy tracks. So, for example, being a teacher in elementary education. And although the type of career pursued may be the woman's choice, it is a structured choice, a choice among limited options as a result of the structures of society. So, when that says limited choice, we can turn to the symbolic interactionist perspective, and kind of explain how we see these women continuing to choose these female-dominated roles, and it could be because they plan to have families, and they think that maybe some sort of other job is going to prevent them to be a mother as well. But the symbolic interaction is for the last point. We'll point out that even though they're picking these jobs, for the most part, it's because they've been socialized that way. They've been socialized that women have these jobs and men have other jobs. So, income and structural sexism. Women are twice as likely as men to earn at or below minimum wage. In 2015, full-time working women in the United States earned, on the average, 80% of the weekly median earnings of a full-time working man. Racial differences also exist. Although women in general earn 80% as much as men, Black American and Hispanic American women earn just 54% of white men's salaries. So here we see how, even with income and pay, there might be two people, that have the same exact job. One is a man, one is a woman, and for some reason the man is getting paid more than the woman is. This happens across many occupations. This is not something that's new. This is an ongoing issue. Maybe you guys have read about it. But yeah, this is a reality of our society. So, human capital hypothesis. The hypothesis that pay differences between females and males are a function of differences in women's and men's levels of education, skills, training, and work experience. One variation of the human capital hypothesis is called the life cycle human capital hypothesis. Here it is argued that women have less incentive to invest in education and marketable skills because they know that they will be working less than their male counterparts as wives and mothers. So again, here we see how these gender roles and the definitions of gender roles and how women are supposed to be the caregiver and stay at home and also juggle work and family and being a mother, continues to affect the lives of females. So income and structural sexism continued is the devaluation hypothesis, argues that women are paid less because the work they do is socially defined as less valuable than the work performed by men. So here we see how people, for example, teachers, we know that teachers are not being paid very well. Many teachers are underpaid. And there is this link, and there have been plenty of studies that show that the reason why teachers are paid less is because, and at first, 50, 60 years ago, it was only women basically teaching, and it was a female occupation. So since it was a female occupation, the pay rate already started as low, and it's just continued throughout time. So emotion work, work that involves caring for, negotiating, and empathizing with people. So, emotion work typically held by females, not by males. Again, all due to gender definitions. Comparable worth. The belief that individuals in occupations, even in different occupations, should be paid equally if the job requires comparable levels of education, training, and responsibility. In a comparable worth lawsuit, nurses successfully sued the city of Denver for paying them less than other employees, tree trimmers, for example, tree trimmers and sign painters, who had less education. So here we just see, the fact that nurses are getting paid less than the tree trimmer or the guy painting the sign or the woman painting the sign is an issue. And again, nurses historically were jobs held by women, and that's why the pay rate for nurses has always been low. Political and structural sexism. Women received the right to vote in the United States in 1920 with the passage of the 19th Amendment. Even though this amendment went into effect more than 90 years ago, well, now 100 years ago, women still play a rather minor role in the political arena. So, we'll see. Perfect example is that we've never had a woman president, which a lot of other countries have had women leaders. And a lot of other countries that have women leaders are very successful. So, the fact that we haven't have a woman president just goes to show that there is issues with politics and sex. So civil rights, the law, and structural sexism. Discrimination still occurs in the workplace as evidenced by the thousands of grievances filed each year with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. One technique employers use to justify differences in pay is the use of different job titles for the same type of work. So discrimination, although illegal, takes place at both the institutional and the individual level. In the United States, women often have difficulty obtaining home mortgages or rental property because they have lower incomes, shorter work histories, and less collateral. Until fairly recently, husbands who raped their wives were exempt from prosecution. Women in the military have traditionally been restricted in the duties that they can perform. So again, this is just basically showing how there's gender issues and discrimination at both institutional level and individual level. So cultural sexism, the ways in which the culture of society, norms, values, beliefs, and symbols perpetuate subordination based on sex classification. So societal definitions of the appropriateness of gender roles have traditionally restricted women and men in terms of educational, occupational, and leisure time pursuits. 50 years ago, little boys playing with dolls and displaying nurturing behaviors would have been unheard of. So, basically what I've been talking about throughout this video. So the social construction of gender roles. Family relations and cultural sexism. From birth, males and females are treated differently. The toys that male and female children receive convey different messages about appropriate gender roles. Gender roles are patterns of socially defined behaviors and expectations associated with being female and male. So let's take the toys things for example. I don't know if you guys heard, but a couple of years, Target decided not to use gender for toys, meaning that back a few years ago, you would be able to go to the quote-unquote girls section for toys and the quote-unquote boys section for toys, and now it's just the toys section. There is no gender assigned to toys. We're seeing that also in clothing and fashion. There's a lot of pushback from people, but at the end of the day, what all these different organizations and businesses and activists are trying to say is that we need to stop telling little girls and little boys, don't do that, girls do that, or telling boys don't cry, only girls cry, or telling girls you shouldn't play with trucks, you need to play with Barbies. Like, we're trying to move away from that because again, these are just socially constructed ideas of what gender is. And why can't a girl play with a truck without being called a quote-unquote tomboy? Or why can't a girl play sports without being quote unquote called a tomboy. Again, we're assigning sports as a male thing, and it's not. We shouldn't define um, colors, clothing, toys, sports as something as genders. We shouldn't say that males are supposed to do this and females are supposed to do this because we're all people, and these are just objects. These are just toys. This is just clothes. And like I stated earlier with the clothes example, back in the day, men wore skirts and heels were made for men before even a woman ever put them on. So we see how these definitions change, and the fact that they're fluid and they change kind of even just points out onto how fragile these definitions are and how we shouldn't really abide by them. So the household division of labor is the fact that women, even when working full time, contribute significantly more hours to home care than men, and it is known as the second shift. So the second shift is basically, a woman that has a full time job, she goes to work, and then when she gets home, she has her second shift, that other job of being, quote unquote, fulfilling her wife duties, her mother duties, cleaning, cooking, raising children, and a lot of women have this second shift, and I'm not saying that men don't, and I'm not saying that there isn't men that don't have a second shift, because we're seeing society move towards that, but historically men have not partaken in the second shift. The traditional division of labor in the household still exists. It's time availability approach, relative resource approach, and gender role ideology. So the school experience and cultural sexism. In a study of 200 top-selling children's picture books, women and girls were significantly underrepresented, with twice as many male title and main characters. Males were also more likely to be in the illustrations, to be pictured in the outdoors, and if an adult, to be visibly portrayed as employed outside of the home. Both men and women were over 9 times more likely to be pictured in traditional rather than non-traditional occupations, and female main characters were more than 3 times more likely than were. So wait, I'm sorry. And female main characters were more than 3 times more likely than were male main characters to perform nurturing and caring behaviors. So this slide is just basically showing how these gender definitions, these roles continue in our society, and we need to start moving away from that. So let's read this slide. Reality television shows such as Toddlers and Tiaras and the beauty pageants that are based on hypersexualize the contestants, some as young as 6 months old. This distorted image of beauty and the Barbie dolls and airbrushed models that follow set an impossibly high standard for female beauty. So this slide is just basically talking about, for example, all these women on cover of magazines that are being photoshopped and airbrushed. Nowadays with social media and all these apps to adjust the way you look and basically photoshopping you and making you, hiding whatever blemish or whatever. These are all standards of beauty that are impossible to attain for the vast majority of people. So if here we are idolizing these models and they're so beautiful, or these actresses that they're so beautiful and they look so perfect, but in reality they're not perfect. They're photoshopped and airbrushed, basically. So media, language, and cultural sexism. Another concern social scientists voice is the extent to which the media portrays females and males in a limited and stereotypical fashion, and the impact of such portrayals. So, for example, Levine and Kilborn in So Sexy, So Soon document the sexualization of young girls and boys. Advertising books, cartoons, songs, toys, and television shows create a narrow definition of femininity and sexuality that encourages girls to focus heavily on appearance and sex appeal. They learn at a very young age that their value is determined by how beautiful, thin, hot, and sexy they are. And boys, who get a very narrow definition of masculinity that promotes insensitivity and macho behavior, are taught to judge girls based on how close they come to an artificial, impossible, and shallow idea. So again, these are issues that are still going on today. So men are also victimized by media images. A study of 1,000 adults found that 2/3 of the respondents thought that women in television advertising were pictured as intelligent, assertive, and caring, whereas men are portrayed as pathetic and silly. Women are dramatically underrepresented as news subjects, and male journalists are more likely to work on the hard news, whereas women are more likely assigned to soft stories. So, religion and cultural sexism. Most Americans claim membership in a church, synagogue, or mosque. Research indicates that women attend religious services more often, rate religion as more important to their lives, and are more likely to believe in an afterlife than are men. In general, religious teachings have tended to promote traditional conceptions of gender. So, I mean, religion is notorious for promoting gender roles and strict gender roles and the definitions of what it means to be a female and a male. Um, and again, we're trying to have a society that moves away from these definitions. The feminization of poverty. Called the feminism of poverty, which is the tendency for women to be disproportionately poor, is evidence in developing nations where suitable housing, clean water, food, healthcare, and sanitary living conditions are scarce. Women in the United States make up the majority of minimum wage workers and are significantly more likely to live in poverty than men. Two groups of women are most likely to be poor in the United States: the head of households with dependent children and women over the age of 65 who have outlived their spouses. Women with children are far more likely to work part-time than their male counterparts or women that don't have children. Further, 22% of male-headed households are below the poverty level compared to 36% of the female-headed households. And about 38% of Hispanic and 36% of black female-headed households are the poorest of all families headed by a single women. So the social psychological costs of gender socialization. Significant others through the socialization process expect certain behaviors and prohibit others based upon our birth sex. Traditional male socialization also discourages males from expressing emotion and asking for help, part of what William Pollack calls the boy code. Adolescent girls are more likely to be dissatisfied with their looks, including physical attractiveness, appearance, and body weight than adolescent boys. The cult of thinness. Research indicates that even before being exposed to advertisements for fashion and beauty products, girls as young as 3 years old prefer game pieces that portray people who are thin rather than heavy. So again, here we talk about how this is not just an issue that's affecting women; it's also affecting men. We socialize men not to be emotional, not to ask for help. And that shouldn't be an issue. Men should be able to show emotion. Men should be able to ask for help when needed. They shouldn't be put in this box. And then if they do show emotion or if they do ask for help, we should not say that that's not a manly thing to do. Boys, too, from an early age are concerned about body image, and as adults, their self-esteem is also linked to body shape and weight. Men are also affected by traditional gender socialization, which places enormous cultural pressure to be successful in their work and to earn high incomes. So, gender role socialization and health outcomes. Men are less likely to go to a doctor than women for a variety of structural and cultural reasons. Men are also less likely to have a regular physician or to go to the hospital, even if time permits. And at every stage of life, American males have poorer health and a higher risk of mortality than females. So, gender based violence. Overall, men are more likely than women to be involved in violence. That is just a fact. Women and girls are also the victims of male violence. Worldwide, as many as 70% of women will be physically or sexually abused in their lifetime. Again, look at that number. 70% of women will be physically or sexually abused in their lifetime. That's an extremely high percentage. At least 1 in every 3 women globally has been beaten, coerced into sex, or otherwise abused in her lifetime. Let's go back to that. This is a story of Sonali. I can't pronounce her last name. She was attacked with acid, has had 27 surgeries. 3 college classmates threw acid on her after she ignored their advances. The men were released from jail after serving 2 years. So here's this woman that just basically ignored advancements by men. Advancements meaning, maybe asking her to go out or telling her that she's pretty or whatever the case. She just ignored the guys. And because of being ignored, the guys were so felt so threatened or I would call it fragile. Their masculinity is so fragile that they had to now throw acid in this woman's face. And who this poor woman now looks like this, and the guy's only spent the 2 years in jail. These are issues that happen. We see things maybe not so drastic as acid, but there are many men out there. I'm sure you've seen tweets or videos or online, women sharing text messages that they've had with guys and or on a date chat, and the guy will ask the girl out, and she'll kindly say, I'm not interested, but thank you. And the minute that no, the guy gets that no, the text messages are, you're fat anyways, or you're ugly, or I was just doing you a favor. Automatically their masculinity is, they feel threatened. So now they have to like put down the woman, and that's just another example, that is not as severe as this acid example. So grassroots movements, these are some strategies for action. Feminism and the women's movement. Feminism is the belief that women and men should have equal rights and responsibilities. I don't think anybody should have a problem with feminism. I don't think anybody should have a problem with that definition. I think all of us in the society should believe that women and men should have equal rights and responsibilities. The U.S. feminist movement began in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848 when a group of women wrote and adopted a women's rights manifesto modeled after the Declaration of Independence. Feminism and the women's movement continued. The rebirth of feminism almost 50 years later was facilitated by a number of interacting forces. An increase in the number of women in the labor force, the publication of Betty Friedan's book The Feminine Mystique, which is a great book, an escalating divorce rate, the socially and politically liberal climate of the 1960s, student activism, and the establishment of the Commission of the Status of Women by John F. Kennedy. All these things listed help propel feminism and the feminist movement. The National Organization of Women, which is now NOW, was established in 1966 and remains one of the largest feminist organizations in the United States. One of NOW's hardest fought battles is the struggle to win ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment, which states that equality of rights under the law should not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. So the men's movement. One of the early branches of the men's movement is known as the mythopoetic men's movement. Participants met in men-only workshops and retreats to explore their internal masculine nature, male identity, and emotional experience through the use of stories, drumming, dance, music, and discussion. The men's movement also includes men's organizations that advocate gender inequality and work to make men more accountable for sexism, violence, and homophobia. So this movement is basically is an understanding that feminism is required. It's kind of like trying to change the definitions of gender roles and gender behavior, and holding men accountable for being sexist or violent or homophobic. So U.S. state and national policies on sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is a form of sex discrimination that violates Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The U.S. EEOC in 2009 defined sexual harassment in the workplace as unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. When this conduct explicitly or implicitly affects an individual's employment, unreasonably interferes with an individual's work performance, or creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. There are two types of sexual harassment. There's quid pro quo, in which an employee requires sexual favors in exchange for a promotion, salary increase, or any other employee benefit. And then there's the existence of the hostile environment that unreasonably interferes with job performance, as in the case of sexually implicit comments and insults being made to an employee. So affirmative action, as discussed in Chapter 9, affirmative action refers to a broad range of policies and practices to promote equal opportunity as well as diversity in the workplace and on campuses. Affirmative action policies developed in the 1960s from the federal legislations require that any employer, university as well as businesses, that receives contracts from the federal government must make good faith efforts to increase the number of female and other minority applicants. So, understanding gender inequality, gender roles and the social inequality they create are ingrained in our social and cultural ideologies and institutions and are therefore difficult to alter as indicated by the presence of discriminatory attitudes. Eliminating gender stereotypes and redefining gender in terms of equality does not simply mean liberating women, but liberating men as well as society. Increasingly, people are embracing androgyny, the blending of traditionally defined masculine and feminine characteristics. An international strategy for achieving gender equality, gender mainstreaming, is the process of assessing the implication for women and men of any planned action, including legislation, policies, or programs, in all areas and at all levels. So that is the PowerPoint presentation for this chapter. Make sure that you complete the lecture quiz now.